Hi BookTube, it's Rose. This is my kind of wrap-up video for judging one of the fiction groups for the BookTube Prize quarterfinals, and I'm recording it like a few days before the judging closes, and I'll upload it straight after the results come out, I hope. So I read the books in Fiction Group D. I'm going to give you my rankings for the 6 of them with like a little mini review of each, which is, I guess, my justification for how I've ranked them. Now, of these 6 books, there were 2 that I thought were pretty splendid, and 3 that I really enjoyed and thought, had significant things in them to like and admire, and 1 book that I thought was abysmal. And honestly, I don't understand how it got through the first round. But hey, what do I know? And it'll probably turn out to be the one that wins the group, and having my usual record. So in time-honoured fashion, I will start at the bottom and work up, reverse order. So book number 6, the one that I thought was abysmal, was, that's very harsh, isn't it? But, no, it's how I feel about it. It's The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno Garcia. She's a Mexican-Canadian author. It's not her first book. Mexican Gothic was a big hit, I think. I haven't read it. What she does is she takes H.G. Wells's Victorian science fiction novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and shifts it to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, but leaves it still in the 19th century, so it's kind of like historical fiction now. And she's using that story, I think, with really good intention, to explore ideas around colonialism and exploitation of indigenous people, humans' exploitation of nature, or the rest of nature, shall we say, scientific ethics, some big themes. It's just that I think she fails miserably to do that. And what we ended up with, as I say, from my perspective, is this kind of like awful mishmash of historical fiction and fantasy and horror and romance, with a plot that was really plodding. Love story, I thought, was risible, actually, positively embarrassing, in fact. I think the fundamental problem is that a story or plot that works as speculative fiction when it's written in the 19th century, if you rewrite that in the 20th century but still set it in the 19th century, it just becomes nonsense. It doesn't work, because of how science has moved, what we know has happened since. Oh, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I would have DNF'd this book, abandoned it, if I wasn't judging it for the BookTube Prize. The one thing I should say in its favour is she can write some really gorgeously immersive sort of description of that part of Mexico. The wildlife, the natural environment. That was the only. Oh, and there's hints of sort of interesting bits of real history in there, but yeah, that's it. So I want you to imagine now you're coming with me across a huge, sort of leaping across a gulf in terms of quality to get to book number 5, because 5, 4, and 3 are all kind of quite close together for me in terms of how I felt about them, although very different books. The one I put at number 5 is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. She's an American novelist. It's not her first book. She's written other novels and also sort of young adult or teen fiction and screenplays. And this is the only book that I'd read before judging this round, but only a couple of months ago, so it's still very fresh in my mind. And this was a book that I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. When I picked it up to read, I had my doubts, but I did. And why did I have doubts? Because it's set in the world of video game developers. that doesn't sound like, my sort of thing, except that I like books that are set in a culture or a place or a community or a world that I don't know well. I can really enjoy that if it's done well. And this was, because gaming is not kind of incidental to this novel. It's integral to the plot, to the characters' relationships with each other. How the almost. And to the style, I think, of the book. It's infused with video games. It is primarily a book about relationships, and about how we mess those up sometimes, particularly when friendships and work relationships and love become kind of entangled and overlap. And at times I got really frustrated with the characters, but that's not a bad thing in a book, to become frustrated, because sometimes people do just mess up their communication and mess up their relationships and their friendships and their that it happens, doesn't it? I suppose that to give it a slightly sort of YA flavour, but I don't mean that as a heavy criticism. One thing that I found interesting about the book is that it's got a main character who's disabled and lives with chronic pain, but that is, again, really integral to the story and the character. It's not tacked on as like a plot device or a way to sort of, I don't know, shortcut a road to character development. So that interested me. Another thing that I found really interesting was the way Zevin draws on her sort of, I think, her personal experience of coming from a sort of a mixed heritage. So her mother is Korean and her father is American, but of sort of East European Jewish extraction, and she uses that, I think, to be able to talk about issues around cultural appropriation in video games, but you feel like you could apply that to writing as well. So really an interesting book, satisfying book. Not it has flaws, but well worth reading from my point of view. On to book number 4. Now, book number 4 was an absolute roller coaster ride for me. Okay, there were huge swathes of this book that I absolutely loved, and then there were bits when the roller coaster dropped to the bottom, and I was really disappointed and frustrated. So, what is it? It's Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel, another debut novel, and she hasn't published anything before, I don't think. In fact, her day job is as a law student, like at Yale. She takes as her starting point the Ramayana, which is the great Hindu epic. I think the first written version of it is from around 300 BCE in Sanskrit. There have been multiple retellings and versions since. Kaikeyi, her main character, is her central protagonist, but in the actual Ramayana, she's a key character, but not obviously the central ones, which were Rama and Sita. She's in the original, she's a strong queen who is sort of turned to the bad and becomes almost an archetypal wicked, villainous stepmother figure. As I say, there have been multiple retellings of the Ramayana sort of over the millennia, and I think there's absolutely a place for writing one today that takes Kaikeyi as a character and turns her from villain to heroine, dropping the kind of patriarchal assumptions of the original to give us a sort of 21st century take on things, but retaining, this is what Patel does, retaining that epic world of kings and queens and gods and demons and magical powers and magical gifts and boons and, all of that. What that does in effect is mean that this read for me as a fantasy novel. And it does that thing that many good fantasy novels do of taking a character and sort of starting in their childhood, and they kind of discover that there's something special about them, and they have to carve their way, their path in life, and maybe find that there are other powers at work on their life that they may not be able to control. Yeah. So, the magical system, I suppose, to use sort of fantasy terminology, worked for me. Kaikeyi is... No, Patel. Now I'm confusing the character and the author. Patel consciously portrays the world of ancient Indian kingdoms in a way that really worked for me. You get kind of like brilliant battle scenes and strong physical sense of different palaces or food. You also get really convincing family relationships, and overall there's this kind of enjoyable foreshadowing of tragic events to come. It's got a lot in common with recent retellings of Greek myths, things by, I don't know, like, by Madeline Miller or Natalie Haynes or Pat Barker, or, there's been a whole load of them, haven't there? And like Miller with Circe or Haynes with Medusa in Stone Blind, she's setting out to kind of flip the misogynist portrayal of her central character and make her someone that a contemporary reader can really kind of recognise and root for. So why is this only fourth? From what I've said, well, I mentioned the roller coaster, didn't I? Because Patel really wants Kaikeyi to be kind of like a feminist heroine, and that's fine by me. I'm all for that. But she forgets to let that just emerge from her story and how she tells it. And she gets this compulsion at times to spell it out in a really heavy-handed way. And those were the moments when the roller coaster dipped, and I wanted to yell at her, no, stop, you can be more subtle. You don't have to do this. So, that's my problem with the book. But absolutely one worth reading for anyone who enjoys a sort of epic fantasy feeling book that's really clever and well written. On to number 3. Now, I've mixed feelings about this book too, but for very different reasons. Okay, this one is Stories from the Tenants Downstairs by Sidik Fofana. Fofana is a school teacher in Brooklyn. It's his first full-length book, and it's not a novel, it's a series of kind of connected short stories. And they're all about people who live in a high-rise block of flats in Harlem. It's contemporary, and it's about their lives and how they're trying to get by. These are sort of low-income households, and they're to various degrees struggling, I suppose, struggling to stay in work or in education or in relationships or in or to stay on the right side of the law or not, how they get by really, and how they're now struggling to stay in their flats because the sort of the new pressure, the dramatic sort of twist, I suppose, in the story is that the owners of the building are looking to push the rents up or push the existing tenants out so that they can do the place up and bring in, more profitable tenants. What's the strength of this book? The strength of this book for me was the way Fofana finds the voice of his characters. He uses language and his style of writing to really, I don't know, you can really hear all these people. You hear their dialogue and through that their thoughts and their feelings such a vivid way. what was the problem for me with it then? Because that sounds brilliant, doesn't it? And it is a very good book, I think. Two problems for me, and there could be problems for me rather than problems with the book, if that makes sense. One is that I have a problem with short stories, and almost a particular problem with interlinked short stories, because I don't like that thing of like I get into a character and their life, and and he gives them all a sort of a full backstory. So I sort of latch onto that person and become really engaged, and then it's switched off. We're on to the next one. So that doesn't work so well for me. And then there's also, I think, when you're writing short stories, a bit of a feeling that you have to tie up the ending in some way of each of the sub story. Each short story has to come to a neat close of some kind of resolution, or and then because they're interlinked and the characters reappear, that almost it's almost worse than if it were just a short story. I'm not sure I'm expressing that very well, and I think that those are possibly things that won't bother other readers. They'll enjoy them as short stories, and then with the added sort of bonus that they are interlinked. If you're a lover of short stories, I would absolutely give this one a go. It's quality stuff. But now moving on to books, my books in places sort of 1 and 2, I want you to imagine another kind of leap for me in terms of the quality or enjoyment or satisfaction of the books, because these top 2 are sort of another sort of scale above for me as a reader, if not for everyone. And one of them is kind of weird and wonderful, and the other is kind of quite strictly realist as a novel. And in some ways I had trouble picking between them, but I eventually put the weird and wonderful one at number 2. So what is that? That's Our Wives Under the Sea by British author Julia Armfield. It's another debut novel, but she'd previously published a book of short stories. Now, it is hard to talk about this book without spoilers, but really important to try. So I'm going to absolutely do my best. Okay. But it kind of limits what you can say in a way. So this book is about a couple, and one of them is a marine researcher who goes on a submarine trip to the deep ocean, organised by a slightly mysterious kind of organisation. Yeah, or becomes mysterious. I don't know. And the other partner is a freelance person who works from home. She writes funding bids for charities, but she's sort of like homebody, as it were. And we meet Miri and Leah when Leah is not Leah, Miri. Which one? Oh, I forget. I've forgotten which is which now. But yeah, when Miri is back from her expedition, and we know that something has gone wrong, and that she might have died or been lost forever. But she is back, but she is not her usual self. Okay, so that's the starting point. And the novel alternates between the voices of the two women. So we get Leah's journal from when she was on the mission, and we get Miri's voice kind of in the present, but also remembering the earlier days of their relationship, but in particular the time when Leah was missing, and how she kind of dealt with that. On one level, this is a horror novel, okay? It's very claustrophobic, in that they're stuck in their flat with each other, but kind of divided by their time apart. And then the bits that the journal, the bits in the submarine, again, a different kind of claustrophobia. There's a touch of the surreal, about the novel and the way it's written. But essentially, it's a book about love and marriage, and what happens to a couple when one partner has a life-changing experience that, I don't know, almost becomes someone other than the person that you fell in love with, the person that you chose. They're not that the partner that was left behind has also had a life-changing experience in a sense, but one has been away and comes back in a different way, and that's something that you might apply to someone who has a catastrophic accident, acquired brain injury, develops dementia. I don't know. There could be many more realistic situations where that happens, and this just happens to be, using a kind of rather surreal horror story to cover that emotional territory, I suppose. That the grieving for the person, the relationship that you've lost, whilst that person is still physically present and needing your care. It's quite bleak. The writing is beautiful, I thought. It's short and intense, which I do like in a book. And yet there's a sort of spaciousness about it. At times it's quite slow, even. It's really infused with the ocean and with kind of our fear of the unknown, which is I think what horror should do. Yeah, excellent book. Warmly recommend it if you like that kind of odd book, which I do. So, what was my book number one? It was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. Yet another debut novel, yet another author who's previously published short stories. And, it might be described as quite a conventional novel, certainly in comparison with Our Wives Under the Sea. Apart from a sort of present day framing device, it's a linear novel set in the past. It's third person narrative. There's no fancy tricks in the style or the writing or the structure of this novel. It's set in 1975 in Northern Ireland, which is where Kennedy is from, where she lives now. She's someone who's come to writing later in life, and yeah, which is something I quite like, I think. It's so 1975 means it's at the troubles in Northern Ireland kind of were really sort of hitting a peak. So intense sectarian strife between Catholic Republicans and Protestant nationalists, and a point at which people were no longer allowed to sit on the fence. Were no longer sort of just say, "Oh, I'm just a moderate person and I don't care about this, and I just live and let live." Like where people were forced to take sides, decide, which side they were on, or almost because of their religion would have it be assumed which side they were on. So if I say that the plot hangs on a love story that's love across those divides, that would sound quite conventional and predictable, wouldn't it? And so why is this such a good book in my perspective, in my opinion? It's because it's just so convincing and real. I was just totally caught up in Krishla's life, in her emotions, yes, but also, I don't know, the physical detail of her world. I don't know, her classroom, the pub that her family owns. I could feel the textures, I could smell the smells. I was there, with her in that world, but also in her emotions. Each incident or scene, I was there physically and emotionally. She just really nailed it for me. And the way she kind of nails these observations in detail can bring brilliant humour about people and understanding, but also great sadness and tragedy. I suppose she brings out that the distinct awfulness of civil war, so war that sets neighbours against neighbours, and she does that without kind of crass melodrama. I found it an intensely emotional book without feeling that I was being manipulated into that, manipulated into thinking or feeling in a particular way. I loved it. There you go. I'm looking forward to seeing the other judges' choices. I think that this may be quite a divisive group. I know that there will be people out there that didn't love my top couple of books. I always enjoy hearing other people's opinions of books, particularly when they differ from me in many ways. And the Booktube Prize is brilliant for bringing that out. So, thank you, Robert, once again for organising this. And, well, tell me what you thought if you've read some of these books too, or all of them if you were a judge.